Jay, you may begin.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to Accenture webinar on Empathy Breeds Innovation, Design Thinking Basics. This session will be recorded. If you feel uncomfortable being included in this recording, you may drop off from this call. You may post your questions anytime in the chat window found in the right hand of the screen. And should you want to post anonymously, just click the post as anonymous box found below. So let's start. Again, good evening. My name is Jay from the Accenture Liquid Studio Manila. I lead the Enterprise Agile Transformation practice here in our Advanced Technology Center in the Philippines. And also, I'm the first design thinking faculty certified in our APAC practice. In the next 30 minutes or an hour, join me and my team. You have Neil and also Kai as we share with you the basics of design thinking and how it is relevant in this social distancing situation. Based on our extensive design thinking experience, one of the key ingredients in doing innovation are its members. I am sure this will resonate with you. When you start forming your group of innovators, for example, you have 20 members. Normally, you will ask them to count 1 to 4. Voila, you have 4 groups of 5. As you start your innovation, you will notice 1 or 2 of the group tend to be very quiet or not progressing. And what you will realize is that majority of the members are actually engineers as a mindset. So we adopted this dominant worldview, which is an exercise from the book of Jeff DeGraff from the Innovation Code book. And I would like to start this webinar with a simple exercise for you to know your dominant worldview or your dominant mindset. So grab your pen and paper, and I will let us take this simple questionnaire and discover your dominant worldview. Are you ready? Because I am. Okay, so as we go along, do not overthink and make sure answer based on your intuition or your gut. So this is 9 question questionnaire. So let's start. What is the most important thing to you? Doing things first, doing things fast, doing things right, doing things together. Let's go next. What are you best at? Starting something new, defeating obstacles, improving how things work, or building relationships. How would you best describe yourself? Creative, decisive, organized, or caring? What do you make decisions? How do you make decisions? I brainstorm through all possible options. I start with the results I want and work backwards to what I need to do. I follow precedents and set of rules and norms. I work to get consensus. What do you invest your time in? New ideas, winning projects and ventures, systems and technology, or high potential people? What do you do most as a leader? I anticipate future trends. I make firm decisions. I use systems to make things run more efficiently, or I listen to others. What is the role that you most relate to? I create new products. I solve problems as soon as they occur. I cut back mistakes, or I solve conflicts. Last 2 questions. How are you best described in your daily life? Are you inspiring, self reliant, disciplined, or sociable? And last question, what attribute applies to you most? Curious, direct, precise, or kind? Tally all your answers, guys. Then you will know what is your dominant mindset. Are you ready? So, based on your highest total, map your dominant worldview. Either you are an engineer, you are an artist, you're an athlete or a sage. As for myself, I'm an artist. I always envision what's next and I always stay crisp. I'm a visionary in a way. But I want to share with you as well, once you already know your dominant mindset or dominant worldview, there are famous people that you want to emulate. Like for those who are artists like myself, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Larry Page, some of the famous visionaries that are actually disrupting the market right now. And for those who are athletes, you may know Tim Cook. and also ingenuity. Some of the famous people that you want to emulate. For those who are engineer, guys, these are the people that you may want to emulate, like Xi Jinping and Warren Buffett. For those sage who are actually very much connected to their emotions, this like Jack Ma is another example, and the CEO of Wikipedia, which is Jimmy Wales. So again, this exercise is actually an adoption of the innovation code of Jeff DeGraff, and it's very, very useful if you are into innovation. Almost all innovating company in the world, just like Apple, uses more some form of design thinking. So it is super important to you whether you are a designer, you are a product manager, or whether you're just interested with the topic. To understand what is design thinking is very important because no matter where you go or which company you work with, or you're just going to work to on a specific product, and if you're going to do anything related to the topic of innovation, people will start to talk about design thinking. And it will always just come up. It's everywhere. And it's been everywhere for the last 20 years. And it's not going anywhere now. There are some agencies that actually uses design thinking. And the very first question that you may want to ask is, what is design thinking? In the simple terms, design thinking is a philosophy plus a set of tools that help you solve problems creatively. That is the first thing that you need to understand. Now, whether a company is trying to create something new or trying to solve a problem, or a team is trying to solve complex problem, you can use design thinking to get the solution or the art of the possible. Although there are several methods or way of solving problem, design thinking focuses on the human-centered way of solving a problem. It is about empathizing and figuring out who are you designing for, what are their needs, and helping them solve the problem. And then once you have all of those data, you can now innovate based on the insights that you gathered through design thinking. On the other side, there are agencies like IDEO, Fjord, another Accenture company, Luma Institute, and Strategizer. They also call this as a double diamond approach. And in Accenture, we actually use form as our methodology where we do discover. This is where you will know who are you trying to solve or who are you trying to help, and then what ecosystem they're part of. Once you synthesize all those information, you start to describe, you start to reframe your problem statement that will become your design challenge. And then you will do co-creation where you will start brainstorming, you will start ideation, doing prototype, and then you scale it so you can test and get feedback from people until you can actually deploy it based on the chosen solution. In the latter part of this webinar, I'll have Neil to describe more and double click on discover and describe, while Kyle will share with you more about co-create. But I have one question. From those agencies that I've shared with you earlier, what do you think is common to both? It's empathy, right? Innovate using design thinking, innovate with empathy. I think you will agree with me right now that a lot of organizations are still in the tech first mindset. We used to be like that. And we transitioned to be a more human informed mindset where a lot of the solutions that we've been creating are very iterative and agile or nimble. We do a lot of collaboration and cross functional teams. And every time that we do this, our people feels like it's just a serious play. And that's what makes design thinking a unique way of the unique way of thinking, because anyone can actually use design thinking. It's fun because it's very interactive and collaborative. It involves methods that enable empathy with people. It seeks to define problem as it actively seeks for solution as well. It ideates and explores solutions, and it collaborates and involves iterative prototyping. And on top of that, it solves problems of many different types. So before I hand it over to Neil, I just want to ask, what is design thinking? And this is what the definition of Webster Dictionary. But for me, design thinking is really applying a human-centered approach to understand people's needs, spot opportunities, develop more meaningful solutions through collaboration and co-creation. And at the end of the day, empathy is at its core. And I'll now call Neil to share with you and a double click of our discover and describe phase. Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Jay. Again, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us tonight in our webinar. I'm Neil C, and I've been working for Accenture for the past 10 years. And right now, I'm one of the design thinking lead coaches in the advanced technology centers in the Philippines. So maybe you might be wondering what design thinking really is. There is a misconception around it when you just use post-its. Sorry, I have post-its at home. You just use post-its and post them to the wall, use your favorite markers, that eventually that's it. That's a misconception of in design thinking. Design thinking really has more into it. And if we focus on the first phase of design thinking, discover, is the divergence of insights. We get as much data as we can, both qualitative and quantitative. And Jay mentioned earlier that empathy is a commonality in each framework that are differently represented in different design agencies. Design thinking, again, is not only a methodologies, it is a mindset. And the discover phase is where we put that in mind, where we do our research. And empathy, by definition, is not about feeling sorry to someone or liking or agreeing with people. Empathy rather is understanding and co-opt with someone's feelings. We have to understand what people are doing, and we have to understand why people feel the way they do when they are doing it. It is both cognitive and emotional. The discover phase is again the divergence of what we can know from a design thinking research. Before we ideate or solve a certain problem, we seek the problem. We start with a very high level problem statement in this phase, and we invest a reasonable amount of time in discovery as it is a critical initiation. A question of matter is, why do we even design a product if nobody will use it? And discover can help us pivot away from that direction. Now, I'll be sharing to you some two good starting points for you to kick off your design thinking discovery with this very powerful technique. So this technique called observation is very innate to us as humans. We've been doing this since we are in a grade school and even using it as our one of our activities before even coming with a conclusion, a science project, or even before coming with a hypothesis. So other design agencies call this a fly in the wall observation, and it allows you to gather information without directly engaging with the users. That is in order to limit your potential bias or behavioral influences. Now, practicing how to listen with your eyes in order to understand what people value and care about, that will make us listen and observe more such that we will be in a non-obtrusive position and observe from a distance. Now, you may be wondering what will be an output for a certain observation activity. So for me, it's a very unbiased collection of insights we got from seeing and listening. These are first-hand insights that can be used as a data point in our interviews later on, and also describing the statement further. Another good point that I want to share is all about inclusive design. So just a quick story, when we met one of the powerful ladies, Kat Holmes, in a Fortune conference in the US, she shared a wonderful full book she authored called Mismatch. It is personally for me a very, very powerful book that revolves around how inclusion shapes design. Now, inclusion in its Latin word inclusio means shutting up, which makes exclusion shutting out and inclusion shutting in. So imagine inclusion as confining or a confinement inside a circle. So another good point from her is that the definition of disability and design. So we normally define disability as a personal health condition, but in reality, disability is also an understanding of mismatched human interactions. So mismatches are the building blocks of exclusion. But on the other hand, mismatches can be a start of an innovation. And inclusion plus empathy can be an innovation engine at the end of the day. So how do you do this? So we gathered techniques around the globe, and this one is from IDU University, wherein we are identifying both the big, broad, mainstream, and those either on the extreme of the spectrum. So this allows us to look how the target demography is scattered and distributed, and more importantly, a more targeted and inclusive target users for a certain design challenge will allow us to have an inclusive design challenge that will improve both the extremes and the mainstream's population. And as a result, when we select the right mix of people, we are no longer designing one thing for all people. Rather, we create a diversity of ways that different people can use, certainly. So before you start, maybe good questions that you can use is understanding or answering who faces the greatest degree of exclusion, or start with who might have the most to lose in this experience, or more powerful would be whose voice is missing in the current experience. So that's a very good start. And other techniques in the discovery may include interviewing. So it's discussing from your observation as a starting point. Then eventually also I mentioned quantitative research. Nowadays, design thinking in the modern age is no longer about qualitative data alone. So it's a combination of quantitative data to have a more computational and at the same time empathetic approach in driving a problem, seeking or problem solving at a later end. Now heading to our describe phase, if discover is the divergence of insight as and the data, describe on the other hand is the convergence of our findings in the design thinking research. We converge more to a concrete, organized, and comprehensive version of our numerous amounts of transcript. So on the next three methods I'm going to show you, these are good techniques you can start off in organizing your findings. So by definition, persona is an informed summary of the mindset, needs, goals, and typically by your top key stakeholders. And there are certain reasons why we normally use this in design thinking, but let me show you an example. So as an example, we have Samantha Wong. And by the way, it's not her real name from those we interviewed. And that's also a necessary reminder that whenever you're naming your persona, do not pattern it with an actual person you interacted with your design thinking research. Mask it. You can be as creative as you can in this collective persona. Then after that, once you define the persona, you can go on to eye-level scene for the day in the life of Samantha Wong as a young startup for this case. And another points that we have here is a collective version of the frustrations and also the goals from our user research findings of our target people. So earlier, the persona is focusing on a very high level scene, but it will be our center point, not forgetting that we are designing for people. We carry Samantha as we progress to ideating for potential solution. Now your persona will be still on this next activity which we'll be doing called the customer journey. So it uses the high level scene in the persona and allows us to empathize further with our customers or the people that we're trying to help. So how to do this? So the first layer of the customer journey is determining the key stages. So it can be the start, the middle, and the end of the experience, but the middle can be multifold. So the second layer is the step-by-step activity level that the persona does on these certain key stages. Now, the last part is the most important part because this is where we empathize further with the customer. And as a result, we have an illustrative diagram of the emotional journey of the persona. From here, we progress in identifying potential design challenges. We select which points in the customer journey mapped are the lowest points or the points where the dip in the experience happens. So at the end of the describe phase, our exit criteria to the next phase is to have a more specific and refined problem statement. So once you have identified your innovation or design challenge from the customer journey, we can reframe our high-level problem statement to a more concrete version. Now, Other design agencies called it a design challenge, a problem statement, a problem starter, but they focus on summarizing and phrasing your challenge in an explanatory version. So I want to discuss rather on some principles when you are doing this. So number one, when you're refining your problem statement, start with framing it in a positive manner. So psychologically, when we start in a negative note, it may affect the progression from step one to step X. But eventually, if you start with a positive framing, then that's going to be a better starting point. Solution agnostic, definitely. We're not limiting ourselves to one specific technology or solution on the problem that we're trying to solve. It should be open-ended at some degree and can be exploratory by nature in potential solutions. Last 2 points will be not being too narrow and not being too broad. Being too narrow will limit to specific processes that does not improve the bigger aspects of the customer journey. And being too broad would be harder for you or for us to identify solutions for a certain problem statement. Finally, once we converge to a refined problem statement, then we ideate for solution in a collaborative way. So progressing to our next phase, the co-creation phase, I'll be handing it over to my colleague Kai Salgado, as I'm sure she's very excited on sharing her experience and expertise as well. Kai, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thanks so much, Neil. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Kai Salgado. I'm a UX designer and design thinking facilitator at Accenture's Liquid Studio Manila. And I'm going to share with you more about the third phase of design thinking, which is co-create. So this is actually one of my favorite parts of design thinking because it's one of the most challenging. So it's the part where you have all the facts laid out in front of you from the discover and the describe phase. And now it's time to be creative. So it's time to ideate, to think of solutions to your problem statement. So how do we do this? Usually it's through the use of prototypes. So prototypes, they are the currency of innovation. So when you have an idea and you want to bring it to life, the best way is usually to create a prototype. So you know how sometimes you have you see a good idea or a product and you say, "Hey, I had that same concept. I could have done that." But the only difference is that you didn't do it. So if you want to get your idea out there fast, create a prototype and test it. So what is the importance of a prototype? Firstly, it creates a uniform picture or representation of your concept, especially to people who have no clue what your idea is. So imagine different people might interpret your idea in a different way. So it's great to create that uniform representation of your idea. Also, when you see something not working in a prototype, you'll know right away that you have to improve or iterate something. So it saves you money and time from producing something that's still a bit raw. Plus, with the technology nowadays, there are many tools, there are many apps, as well as websites that you can use to help you in creating your prototypes. So there are several ways of prototyping, so it's up to you to decide which one suits your idea most. I also wanted to share with you guys 10 principles of prototyping. So this one is from Strategizer. So I won't drill down into all, but I'm going to share with you guys my favorites. So first is embrace a beginner's mind. So it's basically saying be like a sponge, stay open-minded so that you keep learning. So as facilitators, we have several workshops every week. And even though we teach the same content every time, we learn something new every time we have a new workshop. So there's always a new problem to be solved at the studio, and it's always very exciting for us. Next is also feel comfortable in a liquid state. So it's basically saying don't conform, be flexible and adaptable. So this is actually the principle behind the name of our studio, which is Liquid Studio. So it's about being adaptable. Especially during times like this, you have to be ready to think on your feet and adjust. So it's the same with prototyping. If something's not working, you always have to think, okay, what's the next step? The other one that I like is create Shrek models. So what are Shrek models? These are basically just your crazy ideas. So you just need some refinement, but maybe your crazy ideas might be the right solution to your problem statement. So I myself have an artist mindset. So sometimes the ideas that I have are really crazy, but that's why you also have to expose your work early. So you seek advice or critique from other people. So it might be a little bit intimidating, but you will get good insights, which will help you hold back on your idea a little bit and refine it further. And then the last principle that I want to share with you guys is learn fast by failing early. So at the studio, we call it failing mindfully. Because of course, documentation is part of it, because if not, you would just be repeating the same mistakes. So those were just some tips you can use when prototyping. So there are different ways to prototype, and tonight I want to walk you through 4 different kinds and show you what they're usually used for. So different industries usually use different methods, so I'm sure you'll find the right one for your ideas. The first one that I want to discuss is storyboarding. So they usually use this for commercials, for movies, and from the title itself, it tells a story. So it can be something as simple as a comic strip. It's important to show what it will look like when your idea is introduced into the experience of your user. So as long as you're able to show that, it would be a good storyboard. And also, if you're not good at drawing, there are lots of many free storyboard making platforms online. So I'm sure you'll find one that can help you out. So for the next one, I want to walk you through paper prototyping. So this is used when testing apps or websites. So user experience designers use this a lot to test user behaviors before developing the website or the app. So what they do is they make a rough sketch of the app or the website as seen in the photos here. And what they do is they make the user perform a certain action. For example, they would tell the user, okay, search for the article 5 must-watch K-dramas. And what they would do is they would make the user think aloud on what their process is in navigating through the app or the website. And from there, they can get a good idea of what changes should be made based on the user's journey, like if certain button placement should be moved and other details like that. So the next one is body storming. So this one's really fun. It's sort of like storyboarding, but instead of drawings, it would be through acting or using your body. So it's sort of like a skit or role playing. So it's nice to show what it was like before and after a product was introduced into the user's life. So the before part might look sad or inconvenienced or hassled, and then the after part might be like, oh, thanks to this product, life is so much better. And then the last type of prototyping that I want to share with you guys is scale models. So this one is very familiar to me because I did this a lot when I was in college. So I studied industrial design, and most of our major projects were mostly scale models. So scale models are used in product design. It can be 3D printed models, it can be Sintra board, can be made of plaster or resin molds, whatever material you choose. But what are they for? So it's actually because things look different digitally versus physically. And so they use this to test the ergonomics, how it feels physically, the size, or even the aesthetic. So it's a cost-effective way of seeing it and holding it physically and being able to make quick improvements before you actually mass produce it. Because if you mass produce it before testing, it would be a very expensive mistake. So that was actually the last prototyping technique that I wanted to share with you guys. I hope you got good input from us. I want you guys to start using the concept of design thinking, start creating those prototypes, and who knows, you might be the next presenter in Shark Tank. So I think we have some spare time to answer questions, Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. So we are now ready for any questions.
Jay and Neil and Kai, you can look at the Q&A. Some of the questions have been answered already, but you can also go through the questions and see if you might want to add anything to the answers provided already.
Let me check. Publish.
So there is a question here about, is design thinking an essential skill for an ASE in Accenture? So in our DNA, in our company, innovation is one of the strands. So organically, when you're in Accenture, there will be a lot of opportunities for you to innovate, and design thinking is a starting point for that. We have trainings for that as well, and We're enabling people in how they can start their own projects using this mindset, and at the same time, how can we progress it just from generating an idea to productizing it eventually. But in time, yeah, it's a building up skill as you go along your journey.
Okay, there's a new question from Andrew. How do you prototype software in a design thinking sense?
You want
Hi,
to take on that,
Andrew.
Kai? Go.
Yeah, sure. So for prototyping in a software sense, what we usually do with that is the paper prototyping. So that's the best way to sort of test how your website or your app would look before actually putting in money to develop it. So the best way to really do this is to draw your prototypes, sketch them out, and then user test. So it's a lot of testing. You would want a lot of users to try your app, and then from there you can keep developing before creating your actual wireframe. So the wireframes itself, you can use different programs like Figma or Sketch or Adobe XD. So I suggest you start with paper prototypes, and then as it gets serious and as you get a lot of insights from your users, that's when you can switch to high fidelity wireframes.
There's just one question here about how can you overcome the challenge of designing for everyone when limited by time, budget, and resources? Does having a target market make you any less inclusive? Actually, it's not. What's important is that you start with whichever market you feel the starting point. What's important is that as you explore, you actually do a zoom in and zoom out of this demographic that you're helping with, right? And when one of the activities that we actually use is the territory map. In the territory map, you may start with one of the market, and as you start exploring who are the people they interact with, what are the process involved, and the intricacies of it, you will realize that you can actually link it back to a different uh, persona or demographic. Then you can focus there, and there are you don't really have to spend a lot of time. I mean, there are certain activities that you can do it in just an hour, like you're doing one module at a time. You don't have to exhaust everything in one go, because design thinking is a process that it's not linear, but it's iterative, and you can always go back, because even if you finish discover, you can always, and then you reach the co-create, you may want to go back to describe if you receive some feedback. So don't exhaust too much time. You just make sure that you're allotting specific moments for those activities that you want to do.
Thank you, Kai and Jay. There's a question here. What is the future of design thinking? What is next after design thinking?
Oh, that's nice. Okay, I'll take a stab into it. Um, I think it was last year when I was me and Neil. We went to this Fortune conference, and it was fortunate that we met Tim Brown. He was the CEO. He is the CEO of IDEO, and I did ask him the same question. And in fact, I just wanted to validate some of the things that we've been doing here in the Liquid Studio. And the next for design thinking really is when you. He told me is that, you know what, befriend your data scientist colleague, because they will actually help you elevate your design thinking practice. And we even call it now when empathy plus data, because now there's a lot of data that is all over us, right? I mean, we're surrounded with multiple data. It's just a matter of choosing the right data. The next big thing for design thinking is when you use data and empathy together, you have a computational design, because those patterns from those data will help you focus or zero in on the next innovation that you can actually do for your customer.
There is one question here from Esther, and it's about how do we make sure that you're still paying attention to empathetic design in the prototyping phase? So that's a very good question. So whenever we're doing the prototype, we don't only present it in post-its or even just sharing text level that idea. Eventually, it's advisable that you create a tangible and a visual representation of that using paper wireframes, etc. And within it, you can actually simulate and even get feedback by exposing that version to your actual users. So we highly value feedback in design thinking because it's all around being agile and nimble at the same time. So whenever we expose the actual early phases or baby phases of the idea, we also gather your feedback. from the actual users of that prototype. And if there's anything that, okay, it doesn't ring a bell to them, or they would want some feature to be designed differently, then we empathize with them back again and consider those inputs to be part of the next iteration of the prototype eventually.
I really like the question here. So it's from an anonymous person. He or she asked, what's the best way to do design thinking on a compressed time? Like, for example, 2 hours. So what is the essential to be covered? So what I really like about design thinking is that you can adjust it. So each phase has a number of activities under them. But based on the problem you're trying to solve, you can just pick which ones are fit to that problem statement. So you would get one activity from discover, one activity from describe, and then that's when you would come up with the co-creation or ideation. So it's really up to you how you want to fix that or manage that. But even just one activity from each phase would already give you so much input in designing for your ideation phase. So that's one of the beauties of design thinking.
Thanks, Kai. There's another one here. How do you practice design thinking in an agile environment? That's a very good question. I always share this that design thinking is actually the output of it is an input to your agile delivery. Because remember, when you start working on epics, user stories, if you use design thinking in creating your backlogs, where you actually get the business users involved with you in this process, you're able to validate if that specific requirements that they have in your backlog is a good to have or must have. So these two, we always marry them together because they work hand in hand to provide you a cohesive and cohesive solution, and also deliver them with agility. So design thinking plus agile is a good method that you merge together.
Thank you, Jay. Please go ahead and start. Pick another question from the queue.
I love this question about talking about the disadvantage of design thinking, but let me reframe that to this limitation. So, as Jay shared earlier, right now the today mindset of most of organization, if not majority of the organization, is a tech-informed mindset. But more importantly, as we progress in the next 5, 10 years, there is more value in becoming a more human-centered approach. Right now, not all companies are seeing the value and the change in the way products are being served and designed to the customers that we're to provide service with. Now, maybe the disadvantage at this moment is design thinking's value is not yet known to everyone, but eventually in the next 5, 10 years, we're seeing that customers wouldn't really focus more on what are the limitations that the technology can give them, but rather focus on better products that give them more desirable usability and experience eventually. So eventually, as we progress in transitioning from this initial mindset that we have to a more human-centered approach, we are creating services and products that are more relevant and also desirable to the users.
This one here. So thank you for appreciating the webinar. And one of the question is that what's next after this online webinar from an anonymous participants? Do you have design thinking session or mentorship or resources do you recommend or books? I'm a believer that sharing is actually where you can impart more of the lessons that you've learned. And for us, like what we did earlier, we shared the books that we actually adapted some of the methods like Jeff the Graph in the Innovation Code. In terms of other resources, we don't stop learning. Some of the other materials that we actually look into and experiment are coming from, for example, the Lego Serious Play. IDEO is also one of the source that we use in terms of learning on how they look into different methodology. I also mentioned one in my slide earlier, the Strategizer and Luma Workplace. Fjord is also another company that Accenture have that we also work together. In terms of books, Change by Design by Tim Brown is also a good book that you want to know. And one more thing, lastly, is the book by I'm just thinking of the innovation by David of IDEO. Let me try to think of that, and then
10 phases of
oh
innovation.
yes, 10 Phases of Innovation by it's also by David. I forget his last name. Yeah, but that 10 Phases of Innovation is also another good book for you to actually read through. Go Kai. Anything that you
So there's another
have not?
question here. How do you balance extreme users and average users? So I know Arvin answered this question, but I just wanted to add a little bit to it. So it really depends on the problem you're trying to solve, because we always have this saying in the studio that you can't boil the ocean. So it's basically like saying you can't solve the problems of everyone at once. So what's great about design thinking is we have this thing where we call it a minimum delightful product. So you start with something that just addresses the needs of maybe a small amount of people, and then from there you can build on top of that idea. So when it comes to design thinking, you don't have to solve a big problem right away. It can be the smallest problem, and then we just keep adding and iterating until it solves a really great problem. So yeah.
And also to add on that, guy, a good representation also of the design thinking in a nutshell would be imagining three circles interfacing to each other like a Venn diagram. So the first circle is all about desirability or user experience eventually. So that's our first focus in design thinking. Then later on, as we go and progress, eventually at the later phases of the design thinking, we focus on visibility. Is it even possible to be developed? And ultimately, at the last circle will be all about uh, the viability. So does it even sustain? Do we have enough resources to do this? Is it going to be helping us in the business also at the end of the day? So if imagine if it's weighing on whichever on whoever will be included in a certain solution, imagine you start with the desirability, then later on there will be aspects in the later phases about visibility and viability at the end of it.
There's one here from anonymous participant. How do you encourage operations to join in DT workshops? Like, how do you get the buy-in? I think, again, going back to the main core of design thinking, empathy, right? Empathize to the operations, observe them first. And once you are able to understand where they are coming from and then relate to them what you've observed, that's the time that you actually get the buy-in, because the moment you are able to relate the problem statement and how all these pain points that they are actually experiencing and tell them that how we can actually solve that, definitely when they feel they are being heard and they are involved in solving the problem, you can get the operations people to join those kind of sessions.
Thank you, Jay. There's one more question you might want to answer. How do we practice design thinking in an agile environment?
I already answered that already.
I'm sorry.
I already answered that earlier.
I apologize. I was looking at other questions. Please pick another question then from the
Yep.
queue.
Kai, there's one for you. Are you doing UX tutorial videos like the NN group?
Oh, well, actually, Accenture is holding a lot of different webinars, especially during this time. So, if you just stay tuned and like our Facebook page, Accenture in the Philippines, we have a lot of webinars that we're holding. Actually, yesterday was the tutorial for
Yes.
UX or Figma. But if you stay tuned, maybe there will be more in the couple of weeks, in the coming weeks. So, yeah, stay tuned for that.
For the name of the speakers, again, my name is Jay Samson. You have Mark Neil C. and you have Kai Salgado. Okay, there's another one here, and how does design thinking take place during enterprise transformation? That's also another interesting and a very good question. So we always consider design thinking as foundation in any transformation, because how can you transform if you don't even know what are you trying to transform? Like if you are wanting to do some modernization, or it's just about culture, or maybe it's just adapting a new way of working. With the use of design thinking at the beginning, you can actually get leaders to align on those visions, because again, Design thinking's output will give you different ideas as a potential art of the possible based on that specific vision of the organization. So at the very least, when you're starting your transformation, get all of your leaders to take some time to use design thinking so that you can come up with the pipelines of innovation or maybe a roadmap of what would be the way forward for that enterprise transformation.
Thank you. Maybe we can answer a few more questions before we wrap up for the evening.
There's a question here asking about what is going to be happening first. Do you focus on the innovative idea first before applying the design thinking process, or the other way around, do the design thinking first, then apply the innovation idea later on? So again, if we look back on how we frame and proceed on the ideation or the solving of the problem, we spend a reasonable amount of time in the discovery. So that starts already the process of the design thinking. So if we really want to understand and put ourselves in the shoe of the person that we're trying to help, it's better to start with the design thinking methodology. Then as you progress in understanding, digging deeper and converging to a more concrete problem statement, then eventually you can proceed on identifying a potential innovation challenge, and those innovation challenges can be productized into innovation eventually. So that's my point for that.
I have some points to that also, Neil. Some because we've encountered this, no. Again, design thinking. If you look at it, when we shared about its overview and basic, it includes iterative approach, right? Sometimes an organization may have acquired some new innovations or maybe new technology, and then they will start to see if this is the right investment that they did, and then they will start to go through design thinking. But what they will realize is that when you have that innovative idea in mind, and maybe you already purchased some of the technologies for it, and then you apply design thinking to it, what you will realize is that what else can you actually build on top of it? That's the key there. When you're running design thinking, you can either go the other way, where you start from nothing and then you will come up with innovative ideas. But sometimes if you already have an idea and you just want to build on top of it, use design thinking because it works both way. It's really more on how you choose and curate the right methods and technique. Because for us, like what Kai shared earlier, we've been running a lot of design thinking sessions, and I tell you, every time that we run a session, we change methods, we change techniques because that depends on the objective of the customer that we're working with, and it also depends with the objective that the expectation from the workshop itself. What else do we have
Jay,
here?
there's one question. Can you share a design thinking success story? Maybe share an internal Accenture story.
Sure. Yeah. So this is close to heart. I always love sharing this, and you guys watching us right now, if you can actually um, get your phones and then open your Facebook Messenger and look for Tessa, Tessa. Tessa is actually one of the first success story that we have in terms of using design thinking in using technology for good. So this specific use case that we did, we invited the marginalized youth in the Philippines to actually help them upskill themselves and then to even help them look for a job within their community. So when we did design thinking with them, we were able to understand their aspirations and what we've learned because majority of them are millennials. They'd rather talk to a virtual assistant than talking to a live agent. So what we've learned also as part of the research that we did with our team is that in the Philippines, I think you are aware of this, we have this special arrangement with Facebook and our telco. They call it Facebook Zero, where anyone in the Philippines can actually access Facebook Messenger with no data required. So we leverage on that. Again, building on top, right? We leverage on it as a platform. And then after we finish our design thinking session with the targeted youth in the northern part of Manila, we were able to create a virtual assistant, which we call her Tessa. And one of the other thing that we've learned as a success in that made this successful is that we created the conversational flow of the virtual assistant to the margin to the targeted youth. The other thing that we also added, because again we're talking with millennials, right? We make sure that Tessa can also accept emojis as some response, and if we're a smiley, Tessa would know that this is the one they're talking to is happy or not. And because of it, it's now live and it's been helping a lot of youth in the Philippines. In fact, if you search it on YouTube, Tessa with Plan International, it's now being perceived as to be a global instance that can help other youth in the different part of the world. And we are very proud with that specific solution that we did, because in just a short period of time, we were able to create a working prototype, and then in just a couple of months, it's live and it's now helping a lot of youth. That's a very good example where technology is actually being used for good. See there. Took the lead last year, game changer for me. Keep it up, DT team. How does Encanto? What else? Let's check other questions.
Oh, so there's one here. From Curious Bat. After arriving at a number of potential problem solutions, how do you choose the best available option? So this is in the co-creation phase. So
Yeah.
after ideating and you have a number of ideas that you have, how do you choose which one is best? So we have this method called idea prioritization. Maybe it's something that you're familiar with. So basically what we do is we measure in terms of impact and in terms of price, or how hard it is to implement that idea. And from there, we come up with 4 different quadrants. So, and then from there, we would pick the idea that would have the most impact, but the least amount of cost or effort in trying to implement that product. But also, of course, you have to take into consideration if it's a long-term project, if it's just a short-term fix. So those are things that you can look at. So idea prioritization is one of the activities in design thinking that would help you choose the best available option to your problem.
Yeah. Another way to curious back to your question, it's actually a good question. If, for example, you are designing with a group of team and there's this one particular stakeholder who is the decision maker, we actually do voting. So we give everyone their votes, and then you use heat map, and then based on the most number of vote, that can be your prioritized idea. And sometimes, even though it has most of the vote, sometimes a decision maker who will actually read through all of that, they may vote the next one, depending on, again, to Kai's point, its impact and also the cost of implementing it and how easy it is to implement. So those are the two types of way of doing it: heat map and also prioritization. There's one question: how can one be a certified DT facilitator? There are different ways. I mean, even for me, there's a journey before I got my certification. First, of course, you have to do the basics, like understanding the foundation, and then do more of facilitation, because learning through doing is important. That's where we were able to at least have mastery of we in the Shuhari way of learning. We were able to reach that when we are able to challenge and then create our new norms. Once you're able to do that in Accenture, we have our own certification body where they will give you a certain use case for you to be certified. So there's a process to it. Other way though, if you want to be certified externally, we've mentioned about IDEO, and there are other agencies that actually do it as well. Ah, there's one here. How do you do design thinking if you don't have direct interaction with end users? For example, you are commissioned by a company to develop a solution. However, your interaction is only through a business analyst from the client. So, that's a very good question. No? I mean, we know sometimes we call them digital nomad, where they are actually doing work remotely. And with this current situation that we have in this social distancing situation that we are in right now, it's kind of difficult for us to really interact directly with the end users. However, again, going back to the next big thing for design thinking, right, the computational design. If there are existing data about those end users, if you are able to collect that, analyze those information, that can be your first step. And then once you are able to focus your attention based on the data that you gathered, that's the next step that you need to do, where you can present those findings that you have, and then that can actually kick off your interaction with the end users. How different?
Jay, maybe you can take a different question from that.
Yeah.
It was already answered.
Yeah. Okay, let's see.
Just scroll up. There are many questions.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you for all of these questions. These
Yes,
are
guys,
wonderful.
thank you. It's overwhelming. There's a lot. And thank you for the comments.
Maybe answer one final question. We have about 2 minutes left in the webinar.
Answer this already. There's one here. Maybe this is simple, but it's actually interesting. How do I start a career in design thinking? Um, Again, when I started the overview about design thinking, everyone can actually do it. I always share this as well. If you start putting design thinking as your mindset, and you imbibe the thinking, adapting the principle of it will be easier. So from reading books relating to design thinking, solving problem, applying design thinking, and then once you want to do this career, there's a lot of organization like Accenture actually leverage a lot with people with that kind of mindset, because right now, especially in tech, they're looking for diverse mindset already. So if you have that, that can be a start of your career.
Okay, Jay, maybe we can wrap up. If you can just remind the audience of our request for feedback.
Yep. So again, everyone, this is overwhelming. We appreciate all of your questions and commendations as well. And thank you for joining us tonight. And there are other series of webinars that are already in plan for all of you to attend. Please make sure to share your feedback. And I think there will be a mentee, right, with certain codes. So yeah, so that's it for tonight. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Kai. And
You can, sorry,
yeah.
Jay. They can go to menti.com and use pin 504985 to give their feedback. We would love to hear your feedback.
There you go. We would love to hear your feedback tonight for tonight's session. Please log into menti.com and use this code 504985 to answer those short survey. We appreciate your time. Neil and Kai, any parting words before we end?
Thanks for everyone. The interaction and the questions are really, really pretty interesting, and we're a bit overwhelmed with it. But those are very good questions, and thanks for publishing those. It really, really is a good starting point for discussion for everyone. So thanks again for joining tonight's session for the webinar. Kai?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you also to everyone that attended tonight's webinar. It's nice that we end it this way, asking for feedback, because in design thinking, we also end our sessions this way with an I like, I wish sort of portion, because we always want to continue iterating and improving our design thinking practice. So your feedback is very valuable to us. Just go to menti.com, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you in the future webinars of Accenture. Thank you.
Happy weekend. Thank you.
Happy weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Happy weekend.